I mean, well, if anything, it gave us another opportunity to shit on the movie Venom in another episode of the podcast, so I'm all for that.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I'm never going to get tired of shitting on that movie. Welcome, nerds, to another episode of the Nerds You're Looking For podcast, a weekly nerd culture podcast that discusses the culture through various segments. You can check out all of our content at thenerdspodcast.com. For you gamers out there, we do have a YouTube channel that I've been kind of slacking on a little bit, but definitely check it out if you enjoy gaming as much as I do. We also have a gaming journal where I track all of the games that I've beaten throughout the year and kind of give quick reviews for each. For you movie buffs out there, we do both. My co-host and I have Letterboxd accounts, and I am at the Nerds Podcast. You can follow my co-host at that Tyler Hunt. We also have the star ratings for every movie that we've ever reviewed formally on the podcast on our website as well, just by clicking on the Nerds Review tab on our website, thenerdspodcast.com. I am joined by my co-host, as always, that Tyler Hunt. How's it going, man?
I am doing pretty well, man. How are you?
I think we say this literally every episode, but it's been kind of a crazy couple of weeks. I think for both of us, I know that you had to work most this past weekend. So, yeah, it's been kind of a crazy weekend and week in general for the both of us. I will say that I should apologize. This is my week to edit, and honestly, if you were expecting to see this episode posted when it normally gets posted, I apologize for that, because we are not recording this until, I think this might be one of the latest episodes we've ever recorded ever on the podcast. We're literally recording this. It's like 5:30 Central Time on Monday, and we usually have it posted by right now. Like literally a half an hour ago, the Facebook status update would have posted, because I always have those timed for 5 o'clock Central Time. So yeah, we're definitely late because we haven't even we just literally just started recording.
Yeah. So I think you said it. It's weird to be recording at a point where the podcast would have already been in the can for like 36 hours. But yeah, it is what it is, man. We got to do it. So we both had crazy weekends, and somebody couldn't get their ass to the movie theater, so here we are.
I just want to say that it's 2018. We have Amazon and we have airplanes. Why the fuck are there still trains? I got caught behind another train again. I think I told that story when I was talking when we reviewed The Predator is when the first time. And now I just have to go a different way to the movie theater now because I'm so afraid that I'm going to get stuck behind another train. So, yeah, I didn't get to see it until, well, we're going to review Bad Times at El Royale, and I don't think I saw that until like 4 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. So, yeah, it's kind of been a scramble to get this episode together.
Yeah, that's a really Midwestern problem, is that you missed a movie because of a train.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird thing. Like I said, it never happens. Like, it's happened twice in the last, I would guess, a month. But I see so many movies. I see like 2 or 3 movies a week, and it's happened twice. So, I mean, I guess probability tells you that it doesn't happen all that often. But the fact that I now have to stress out about whether or not I'm going to miss a movie because of the fucking train, I just now have to take a separate way to go to the movie theater so this doesn't happen again.
For sure, man. There's other ways. I mean, I know Evansville pretty well from your house to the movie theater where you can avoid it, so shouldn't be a problem going forward.
For sure. So if this is your first episode, we normally don't talk about trains for this long. We usually jump right into our first segment. We break up every episode into segments. And the first one we call What We're Into. Normally, if this was a regular episode, it would just be like whatever we're watching or read or whatever. But we decided to do something a little bit special for October, starting last episode, where we do this thing called Shocktober. We talk about it a lot, where we watch a bunch of horror movies throughout the month of October. And we decided each episode we're just going to recap what we watched for Shocktober that previous week. So, Tyler, what'd you watch this week?
So, like you said, we're recording on a Monday, so I'll save my Sunday and Monday viewings for our next episode. So if you want to know what I watched yesterday or today, you can tune in next week. So I'll just stick to the official October week 2 recap that I have here. And I know for a fact we are going to double up because my first viewing from last week that I watched was influenced by you watching this and posting it on social media. And my wife and I love this movie, and that was enough of a push for us to watch it too. And that's What We Do in the Shadows. So we've talked about this movie quite a bit on the podcast. I think we both had it in our top 10 the year that it came out, and I've brought it up sporadically since, and I think you have as well. This is just such a funny movie, and it holds up so well. Like, I don't think that it would be on my top 10 necessarily of all time if I went back and redid that, but it would definitely be in the top 20 because the rewatch value of this movie is insane to me. Like, I still find myself laughing really hard at the same jokes. It holds up incredibly well. If you don't know what it's about a documentary crew following a group of vampires in New Zealand. It's directed by Jermaine Clement from Flight of the Conchords and Taika Waititi, who, of course, did Thor Ragnarok. So it was from, I think, 2013 or 2014, but it's a great movie. They've spun it off into some TV shows. I know there's a show on the air right now in New Zealand called Wellington Paranormal that I haven't checked out yet, but I believe they're also doing kind of a remake of it for FX, if I'm not mistaken. So that show is probably in production right now. So it definitely has legs. I'd love to see it get a sequel someday, but it's really funny, and it being based on vampires and werewolves and the supernatural, I think it's a movie that you and I both count for Shocktober. The second movie I watched last week was The Ritual, which I think I had mentioned on our Shocktober preview episode. This was a movie that came out this year on Netflix, and I don't know that it was a Netflix movie necessarily, but I think that it started to pop up on everyone's radar once it hit Netflix, and I had purposefully been holding off on watching it until Shocktober because I knew it was a horror movie, and I liked it quite a bit. I think on Letterboxd I gave it a 3.5 out of 5, so it's not like world-shattering or anything like that, but it's a pretty decent horror movie. It's a foreign film. I can't remember if it's English. I don't know. It takes place in Europe.
It doesn't matter. It's foreign.
Yeah. Well said. But it takes place in Europe. These group of friends go out on this hike in memory of one of their buddies that died. And, of course, once you go on a hike in a horror movie, bad shit starts to happen. And that aspect of it is a little cliche. But I will say the horror that they're dealing with in this movie is unlike anything I've ever seen before. I knew nothing about this movie except for they ran into shit in the woods, and what they run into is insane. It's not like anything I've seen before. So I know it's based on some kind of mythology, but I would definitely recommend watching it if you're doing Shocktober this year, or even as a movie leading up to Halloween. It's not terrifying or anything, but it's a pretty good watch. The next movie I watched was another first time for me. It was Creep 2. So I really liked the first Creep with Mark Duplass, and this is a sequel to that. And I thought it was really strange they made a sequel to that movie. I knew that it had legs on Netflix and it found its audience, but I thought that it was strange that they made a sequel to that movie because it kind of stands on its own. But I will say I think Creep 2 is better than Creep 1. So it's about Mark Duplass's character. He's a serial killer. He hires somebody off of Craigslist in the first one to kind of be a videographer for him for his unborn son because he's dying. And as you can imagine, all of that is a lie. And he ends up, spoiler alert from the first Creep, killing the videographer. In this movie, he hires somebody to make a documentary about him off of Craigslist. And there's other layers to it, but basically he's upfront with her that he's a serial killer, and for a weird reason, she kind of goes along with it. She has a YouTube show, and she thinks it'll make a really good episode of her YouTube show. And, of course, shit kind of spirals out of control here in this movie too. But Mark Duplass plays an excellent, creepy, like, psychopath. So I would definitely recommend that movie as well. The movie I watched next was The Nightmare, which is a documentary actually, but enough lists out there on the internet said that this was one of the scarier movies on Netflix rather. And so I wanted to give it a go. It's about sleep paralysis, and it's about these people that suffer from it, like recounting what sleep paralysis is like, and they do reimaginings, and I guess just, I don't know, what would you call that? Like whenever you watch like a show and they do
dramatizations.
Yeah, that works. So they do like a dramatization of their nightmares that they have, and it's pretty creepy. And I gotta say, like, watching this right before I went to sleep, like I probably lost a little sleep after watching this movie, just because I didn't want to fall into some kind of sleep paralysis. I didn't really know a ton about sleep paralysis, but it sounds horrifying. Like, you can't move, you can't talk, you feel like you're awake, and all of these people tend to like see these creatures or these figures in their room that approach them and say these terrible things to them, and it sounds horrifying, like I said. And I don't think that I think people can go to therapy for it, but I don't think that there's something that you can do to kind of cure it. So definitely scary stuff. But the last movie I'll talk about that I watched last week was watched because I thought we were reviewing it on the podcast. I thought we had agreed to review Goosebumps 2 Haunted Halloween. So my wife and I saw this Saturday night, and I probably would not have seen this in theaters had it not been for the podcast. So that was just miscommunication on our part, or a misunderstanding. But I mean, I don't regret seeing it. I got to count it for Shocktober. But if you go back and you listen to our Goosebumps 1 review, I think we both gave it a favorable review. Like, it's a kid's movie, but there was definitely some places that it was enjoyable. This movie is not enjoyable in my opinion. So if you've seen the trailers for it, you know that Jack Black is, I don't want to spoil anything, but he is not a prominent character in this movie. So instead it's the fat kid from It, and some other actors and actresses I don't really know. Ken Jeong is in it, and the blonde police officer from Reno 911, Wendy something or another, is in it. But for the most part, there's no big actors in it, and it is very much more geared towards kids than the first one was. It is pretty cringeworthy in some spots. There's a place or two where there was some enjoyment, and I think I've said this a lot, especially as we talk about horror movies in Shocktober. Like, I really love the suburban feel of a horror movie if it takes place in like a blue-collar neighborhood or something like that, and this movie definitely takes place in that setting, so that was something I enjoyed about it. But for the most part, it is a pretty lackluster sequel to that first one that I thought did a cool thing with Goosebumps mythology. So Pat, I know we were talking off air that you plan to see this weekend, and I don't want to dissuade you from seeing it by any means, but I think you should just have your expectations tempered.
I mean, I enjoyed the first one. It didn't blow me away by any means. I think we were both kind of just happy with how much fun it was.
Yeah.
I didn't really expect a whole lot from the sequel. I honestly, until about a couple of months ago, had forgotten they were even making a sequel. So it wasn't something that was necessarily on my radar. So if it's as bad as you say it is, then, I mean, there's really no harm to it as far as I'm concerned. My wife just really wants to see it, and we got her A-list not too long ago. So I've been trying to make more of an effort to see the movies that she really wants to see, because she sees a lot of shit with me that she probably doesn't want to see. Most notably Venom last week. She definitely did not want to see that, but she saw it with me because she is a better spouse than I am, for sure, 100%. So I'm definitely going to go see a lot of movies that I necessarily wouldn't want to see for her, most notably A Star is Born. I am dreading going to see that movie, but I will, of course, eventually see it.
Bro, I saw A Star is Born last week with my wife because...
Did it change your life?
Because I am husband of the year, and I had zero interest in that movie. I think you and I have talked about it off podcast, but the whole premise to me from the trailer was, oh, Lady Gaga, she's so hideous, she could never be a pop star. And of course,
exactly,
in real life, she's a stunning pop star, and it's dumb as hell. But I fucking loved it, man.
Really?
Yeah. It's
top
got
10 so far? Would it crack your top 10?
Yeah, it's on my top 10 right now. It's got
Crazy.
a 90% on Rotten Tomatoes, and I did not fucking expect it. Like, that movie lingered with me for a couple days. I've never seen any of, I guess there's 2 or 3 other Stars Borns that have come before this, and I've never seen any of them. So I didn't know some of the plot points of this movie, and it completely caught me off guard. And yeah, Bradley Cooper is amazing in it, and Lady Gaga is as well. So yeah, temper your expectations, but don't let me oversell it for you. But I loved it.
She's gonna get that EGOT.
Oh yeah, she might. We'll see. I think Bradley Cooper might get Best Director. We'll see.
Really?
But he's really good, and it's really well directed. So,
cool,
have you
man.
seen any of the other Stars Borns?
No.
I can't imagine you have, but I don't know. I also
I
couldn't
have
imagine that your
never
first DVD
seen
ever
a Barbra
was How High.
Streisand
So.
movie in my entire life.
That's fair.
And if you thought, like, when you were listening to that I said it with pride, I certainly did. I did say that with pride.
I've never seen a Barbra Streisand movie either. So
Literally, if I were to pick one thing to put on my tombstone, it was the fact that I've never seen a Barbra Streisand movie.
There you go, man. Cool. So that is what I have for Shocktober week 2. What did you watch?
So I kicked it off last week with a movie, again, trying to be a better husband, that my wife really wanted to watch, because I feel bad because a lot of times she gets kind of stuck with watching a bunch of horror movies in October because she's just stuck in the house with me, and that's usually a lot of what I do in October. So I let her pick one. I actually let her pick 2 this week, so she's real lucky to be my wife right now. No, the first one that she picked, both of them are animated. The first one that she picked is the classic The Nightmare Before Christmas, which I know some people will argue that, is this a Halloween movie or is this a Christmas movie? It had been a really long time since I saw this movie, and honestly, the more I thought about it, the more I really wanted to come into this episode and be like, no, it's a Christmas movie. No, it's a Halloween. Like, at least have a strong stance on it. And honestly, after watching it, I don't think it matters. Like, I can hear argument from either side, and for me, it doesn't necessarily matter, because I think really what that movie is you trying to find who you want to be and like what you want to do and be okay with it, instead of being pigeonholed into whatever it is people think you are, to find what you want to do and what you want to be and kind of do it. And so that's kind of what I get from that movie. And so I don't think it's necessarily a Halloween movie. I don't think it's necessarily a Christmas movie. And if that's a cop-out, then that's fine. But that's just kind of how I feel about it. It's been a really long time since I've seen it, but I'm really glad that we watched it, because I needed to watch that movie again, because it's fantastic. The music is a little too much for me at times. Like, the songs go on a little bit too long, but I think it's just a fantastic movie. And then I watched a movie, like you said, you knew I was going to talk about, What We Do in the Shadows, which I'll be pretty brief because Tyler touched on a lot of stuff that I was going to actually bring up. I will say that as much as I loved this movie when it first came out, there was a couple of moments where I thought maybe it kind of dragged the first couple of times I saw it, and I don't know what the hell I was talking about, because I think it's fantastic. Like, I watched this movie, I think it was the Nick and Stu stuff just didn't resonate the first time or the first couple of times I saw it, and now that I've watched it again, I'm just like, man, it's still a really good, like, I understand why they did it, because it brings so much, literally and figuratively, like, fresh blood into the movie. Like, I don't know if you could continue the way that they were going with just the 3 or 4 of them. How many is there? I guess there's 4 of them with Peter, but yeah. I mean, he dies. Spoiler alert, I guess. But I don't think you could continue with that movie and it still be fresh if you didn't bring somebody else in there. So I thought that was really cool. I'm not sure why I thought that part made the movie drag the first couple of times I saw it, but it's definitely almost guaranteed to make my top 100, which is a project that I've been working on the last few months. So I was definitely not that I hated this movie by any means. It was still like one of the bubble movies for my top 100, but it's definitely, now that I've seen it and I appreciate it even more, it's definitely going to make that top 100. And then the third movie that I want to talk about is The Girl with All the Gifts, which is a movie that apparently I watched before, because when you check in to a movie on Letterboxd that you've already checked into, it automatically checks that box for you. So apparently I've already checked into this movie. I remember wanting to watch it one night, and I must have checked into it and started it and like fell asleep or something, because I don't remember watching this movie from start to finish. It is a movie that I know a lot about because I have listened to the audiobook. It is based on a book. It was actually written by the same guy. The same guy that wrote the book also wrote the screenplay. And honestly, I don't know. I just had forgotten about the ending, how much I hated the ending of the book. And as we were getting like closer and closer to the ending, I was like, oh shit. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's right. There's these stupid kids that happen at the end of the movie. And it's just, the ending really kind of, at least for me, spoils any good that happened like 75% of the way through the movie. So it's a zombie movie. It's a lot different than most of the zombie movies that you're going to see. So if you're a fan of the genre, I definitely say check this out because it's different, especially if you didn't read the book or you didn't listen to the audiobook. I think it will definitely play a little bit better to you than it did for me, but I don't know. I was just disappointed because I thought the book ultimately was pretty good, other than, of course, the ending. Then the fourth movie that I watched was Drag Me to Hell, which is a movie that really blew me away the first time I saw it. This was kind of the first movie that I watched that I was like, hey, maybe I'll be a fan of like the meta kind of humorous take on horror that Sam Raimi does, and he's kind of almost invented on his own with the Evil Dead franchise. And I think every time I watch it, I like it a little bit less and less every time, and I'm pretty much done with this movie. Like, it's not a bad movie by any means. It's just the joy I got out of it the first time I saw it, or in the first couple of times I saw it, really kind of fades a little bit more every time. And I like it. I still think that it's a good movie. If you've never seen it before, I would definitely suggest going to see it. It just doesn't do the same thing for me anymore. I still on that beginner's guide to Shocktober list that I made. And again, if you haven't seen it, I think that it's a worthy watch, but for somebody that's seen it, I think like this is probably like the seventh time that I've watched that movie. It just doesn't do it for me anymore. The next one that also a movie that I've seen quite a few times is Pet Sematary, which I know that you've talked about this movie before. It's been a while since I've watched it. I used to watch it a lot. I've seen it quite a few times. I don't remember the acting being as bad as it was. I remember it being bad, but I don't remember it being like almost unwatchable bad at times. Like, the mom is really bad. The dad is horrible. So bad. I mean, it's a fun movie, as fun as horror movies can be. And I don't know if it was necessarily going for fun, but I just think that movie is just almost not quite Drag Me to Hell, like just ridiculous, and you laugh at it a lot. I don't know if it was necessarily going for that, but I have a good time while watching it. So I don't know if it's necessarily a great Shocktober movie because it doesn't really shock me. It's more just kind of a fun, silly horror movie to watch. But yeah, the acting is really, really bad. And then, of course, I always count going to Shocktober in Irvington every year, which is a event, like a horror film festival that is hosted by our friends over there at the Obsessive Viewer. And my wife and I drive to Indy every year and check this out, and it was great. I mean, it's great every year. I finally posted our Shocktober in Irvington short that we did a couple of years ago, and I posted the same day that we went to Shocktober, just kind of in honor of that. I finally got around to making a few changes to it and then posting it on YouTube. So every year that we go to this event, I think, wow, like they've got some really awesome filmmakers in Indy that do some really just amazing work in the horror genre. So I'm not going to list everybody. I will say that it's funny that you brought up The Nightmare that sleep paralysis documentary because one of my favorite shorts, it probably honestly was my favorite short, was called Sleep Paralysis, and it was pretty much, it sounds like exactly what you described in the documentary. It was just like one of those dramatizations of sleep paralysis, and of course, after they show the short, they always have the filmmakers come up and they interview them. And the guy actually mentioned, and I don't know if this has anything to do with his condition, but he was actually in the Marine Corps for 5 years, and he was a combat cameraman. And that's kind of how he learned how to do films, is being in the Marine Corps, which I didn't even know that was a thing, that you could just be a cameraman in the Marine Corps. So that was pretty cool. And then he just kind of talks about his condition. Him and his sister also have this same condition. And he just, basically, this was his way of putting it out there and kind of in his own like artistic way, relaying what it's like to live with this condition. And he mentioned that there's no cure for it. Like you said, Tyler, that you can go to therapy and stuff like that. And there's way to control it. Mostly he talked about how you get to a certain point where you have to start, okay, I know that this is a dream. I just have to let it go, and in a couple of minutes it'll pass. And he also talked about how like he's done a lot of research, and most people, alien abductions can be credited to sleep paralysis. Like they've done studies with that and stuff. And I just thought he was a really interesting interview, and it was also happened to be the creepiest short too. It was really cool how he did it. So I will say that we have a blast every year, and it seems like every year they get better and better stuff. Especially considering we probably are the lowest bar as far as what they've shown at these film festivals. So I thought it was really cool, and I enjoy going every year, and they put out a really good show. And the last movie that I'll talk about real short is an animated movie I didn't even know existed, and it's another one. It's the second one that my wife picked out. It's called Extraordinary Tales, which is an animated film that is essentially, it's interesting. They take 5 Edgar Allan Poe shorts and basically have a narrator essentially read it to you, and they kind of animate it as it goes, and each short has a different narrator, and they have a different kind of animation style. And so it was pretty interesting. I will say that after the first couple, it was like, okay, like this is cool, but I don't know if I necessarily need to watch an hour and 20 minutes of this. Like, I thought it was pretty cool that they got a radio play, I guess, of Bela Lugosi doing one of Edgar Allan Poe's poems or short stories or whatever you want to call them. And they animated that, and so I thought that was kind of cool that they were able to get that and find that, and it just kind of really fit the concept so well. And I mean, Guillermo del Toro did one, so that was pretty cool. But for the most part, it was a cool concept. I enjoyed it, but I was like, do you really need 5 of these? Like, it was literally just somebody reading the short story to you while they kind of animated what was going on. I think I would have preferred if it was more of an interpretation instead of just literally somebody reading the story to me.
Yeah, that sounds like it'd be cooler, although it does sound like they got some pretty cool narrators for that. So.
For sure.
Yeah, no,
but that is my week of Shocktober.
That's a successful week, man. I always regret that I can't go to Shocktober in Irvington because I have work stuff typically that weekend every year. But it sounds like it was a good year for that too.
For sure, it was a lot of fun. We look forward to it every year. It is kind of a pain in the ass because we do drive up there and back the same night, and my wife had an art show the next day, so it did make for an even busier weekend than I had anticipated. But all in all, it was definitely worth it.
Nice.
All right, so our next segment is just plainly called Comics. Tyler and I read a ton of comics each week, and we like to spotlight one or two. So what'd you read this week?
I read a new comic called Infinite Dark #1. It's written by Ryan Carey and drawn by Andrea Moody, and this is a new comic from Image. So this comic takes place on a spacecraft called the Orpheus, and even though this book is a sci-fi horror thriller, the spacecraft itself, to kind of explain the setting of this book, reminds me of WALL-E, because it hosts 2,000 people that left Earth and live aboard this ship. And for whatever reason, that reminds me of the By and Large ship in Wall-E that all the fat people live on. So the problem is, after this ship, the Orpheus, left Earth, the entire universe is essentially decimated. Like, the universe ends, and all that's left of humanity is these 2,000 people. So the book itself follows the captain of this ship. It's a character named Deva Carell. In issue 1, she basically is giving us the backstory of what's going on, and we also get to dig into her psyche through a mandated therapist session that she has to routinely do, and it's very evident that a lot of people on board this ship are dealing with survivor's guilt, including Deva. So from there, the book moves on to what the story promises to mainly be about, and that's the discovery of a murder. It's the first time a murder has occurred during this 2-year voyage of the ship, and it looks like future issues of this book are going to follow Deva as she investigates, and it looks like there may be some extraterrestrial motives behind it. So as far as a review of the book goes, I definitely like this comic quite a bit after issue 1. This first issue does move a little slowly, but it doesn't force exposition down your throat, and it really gives you a feel for what these survivors are going through, and it makes you immediately care about the characters, which I know we review a lot of number ones on this segment of the podcast, but that's obviously one of the more important things that you need to do in an issue 1. It's definitely a cool concept for a book as well, and it looks like there may be a lot of twists and turns to explore to find out exactly what's going on in future issues. On top of that, the art is also really great. So Andrea Moody, the artist, like I mentioned, really captures the horrors of space, and it pays off on the page for sure. So in the afterword, the author Ryan Carey talks about the influence that movies like Alien and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre had on this, as well as stories from Stephen King and games like Outlast. And that's a pretty cool hodgepodge to pull from, if you ask me. And I'm definitely excited to see how those influences kind of shape the story going forward, and I think it's definitely a book that I'm going to stick with.
So I don't think that it's going to surprise too many of our listeners, especially our longtime listeners, when I say I am definitely a fan of space horror. I think the idea of something horrible happening on a spacecraft where you literally have nowhere else to go is pretty terrifying. Now it's been done to death. Like, there's so many movies that are done that are basically just alien ripoffs that are disappointing. I think we talked about one with Life that was literally, it felt just like an alien ripoff. They didn't even bother changing the creature to not look like a face hugger. And so I definitely think that is done to death, but I think that it's definitely a genre that I'm interested in, and when it's done right, it's done really, really great.
Yeah, so I'm definitely have high expectations for this book going forward, so I'll give it a couple more issues to see if it's among the best. But with that being said, what'd you read?
So there wasn't a whole lot that came out this week that I was all that interested in. Honestly, I wish I had just read Infinite Dark, because that sounds like it's pretty awesome. But I kind of made a joke last week that I was going to talk about this AMC exclusive Venom comic that I got when I went and saw that movie. But of course, after I saw the movie, I was like, well, I'm not going to read this now because it's a shit show. But there was literally nothing else that came out this week that I was vaguely interested in. So I was like, oh no, well, maybe this will bring a new insight into that movie. Not that I think this silly little AMC exclusive comic is going to save that movie by any means, but there are some holes. Most of it's just generic, like, plot holes in that movie, but I was like, maybe there's some backstory that maybe I appreciate that movie like 1% more if I read this. And so I was like, I'll give it a shot. And they have a writer on this book, obviously. The guy's name is Sean Ryan, but I don't even understand how you could claim to have written this comic, because essentially what I wanted it to be was, like I said, some kind of backstory or just some kind of background information, filling one of those plot holes, or maybe even this is actually the route that I would have taken if I was given the task of writing this Venom book. But they mention Eddie gets essentially kicked out of New York. He has to move to San Francisco. Basically, he rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, and he basically had to leave the city. And I, of course, knew that that was just an excuse to get him away from Spider-Man, so there was an excuse why he wouldn't be going up against Spider-Man, because Sony doesn't want anything to do with Spider-Man as of right now with Venom. But I thought maybe if this comic got into why he actually left instead of this vague explanation, maybe it would be, well, first of all, it'd be an interesting comic. Second of all, it might make that movie, again, 1% more interesting. Unfortunately, essentially what this comic was, and I don't even understand why it existed, was they took 2 or 3 scenes from the movie and just made a comic book of it. Literally word for word almost. And I was like, why the fuck does this, it felt like if they made a trailer of Venom into a comic book. That's what it was. And a couple of the scenes that you see in the trailer are in this book. And I don't understand why it even exists. First of all, I'm pissed that I even wasted my time reading it, because I had already seen the shit show that was that movie. So I don't need another refresher on that horrible movie. But also, I don't know if they thought that they were doing this as an appetizer for the movie. But honestly, I literally got this book and walked into the theater and the previews were on. So I wasn't going to read this book before the movie. And I can't imagine that a good chunk of the people that got this book read it right before the movie. So most of the people that read this book probably read it after they saw the movie. And so what the fuck does it do? It does literally nothing for you if you've already seen the movie. So I just don't understand, A, why they even felt the need to do this, and B, who does this serve? It's a free thing that they gave out to the people that obviously have seen the movie. So why, if you're not going to bring something else to the table, why even do this?
Yeah, I mean, well, if anything, it gave us another opportunity to shit on the movie Venom in another episode of the podcast, so I'm all for that.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I'm never going to get tired of shitting on that movie.
No, it was garbage, for sure.
All right, so now that we have gotten our weekly bashing of Venom out of the way, what's nerd news this week?
So it's funny that you mentioned that you watched Pet Sematary last week, because also last week there was a new trailer released for the Pet Sematary remake that comes out in April. So
that wasn't by coincidence, by the way. I didn't mention
really?
that in what we're into, but that was kind of, hey, I haven't seen that movie in a while. I should watch it again.
Yeah. So did you watch the trailer, though?
I did not watch the trailer.
Okay. So everything that is cheesy and bad about that original Pet Sematary, which again, I think we've both said on the podcast, it's not that we dislike that movie. It's just kind of dated at this point, looks to be redeemed with this movie. And granted, it's just a trailer, and it's a trailer for a movie that doesn't come out for half a year, but it looks really fucking good, man. Looks really creepy. Jason Clarke's in it. John Lithgow's in it. So I have high hopes for it. I think that story has legs to be done again, and I think the trailer looks pretty creepy.
Yeah, I've heard some really good things about it. I will say that I did see that. I don't know if it was a poster, if it was just a still photo of Church. I thought that would look pretty cool. So I'm definitely looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's funny. They don't shy away from hinting what's going to happen, though, because that they move to this house, and 5 minutes after being at this house, this semi truck goes barreling down the road.
Yeah.
And then they show that scene 3 more times in the trailers. So I'm guessing that they're going to stick with that as being one of the big plot points of the movie. So,
but honestly, in the first movie, they didn't necessarily shy away from it either. If you've never seen Pet Sematary, they plant the semi thing pretty hard.
Oh, for sure. And it doesn't even make any... I guess they explain it in that first movie, it's a shortcut for them or something, right? But
yeah,
why would a semi be barreling down a dirt road? Either way, that movie's coming out next year, and it actually looks okay. The next story is kind of the duh category. It's Ryan Coogler's coming back to write and direct the Black Panther 2. So Spoiler alert for Avengers 4 next year, but it definitely makes sense. Obviously, that movie made a buttload of money and is very highly regarded, so of course he would come back and do the next one. I'm sure they backed up a semi-truck of money to his house and got him back on board.
Do you think his house is actually made physically of Marvel money? They just like literally built him a house made out of money.
At this point, like that guy has done some pretty great shit over the last few years, so he is not hurting, I'm sure.
Honestly, I don't think this is like, you kind of phrase it as like, well, of course he was going to come back. He didn't do Creed 2.
Yeah, I don't know who makes Creed? What studio makes Creed?
I don't know. I don't pay attention to that kind of stuff.
They don't have Marvel money or Disney money. I can guarantee you that.
I know Rocky isn't the MCU, but it's still a pretty big franchise.
Yeah, I don't know though. I think Creed 2 has promise. I think that it's cool that they're going with the Ivan Drago side of things.
How would you know? You've never watched a Rocky movie.
Because I know enough about the universe to know that he kills.
How do you know
dad.
You've never watched a Rocky movie?
I don't know because those movies are so ingrained in pop culture. It's like you just kind of like, I've never seen a Rocky movie, but I can definitely tell you the gist of each movie, I think.
No, you can't.
The Drago guy kills Creed's dad, right?
You don't even know his name.
Ivan Drago kills Adonis Creed.
Yeah,
wait.
I was gonna
Apollo Creed, and then Adonis is Michael B. Jordan, right?
Yes.
Gotcha. Well, at least they stick to regular names in those movies. In surprising news, in our next story, James Gunn is going to write, for sure, and possibly direct the next Suicide Squad movie. So, if you recall, the episode we recorded after he was fired from Marvel, I said if DC had any idea what they were doing, they would back up a truck. I keep saying I just want everybody to back up trucks of money to people, but I said they would back up a truck of money to James Gunn and have him do one of their movies. And so I'm glad that they did that. I think that Suicide Squad is a weird pool since it's been done already and it was not done very well. But I mean, he's proven that he can do the kind of group superhero movie, or I guess in this case, supervillain movie. So what's not to be excited about? I mean, he's a great filmmaker, and obviously Warner Brothers doesn't have an issue with his tweets like Disney does, apparently. So I'm excited to see him keep working and hopefully put out some good content.
I've actually heard people like criticize this move, not necessarily from Warner Brothers or DC's angle. It's more of like, why would he do this? Like, Suicide Squad's not that big of a character for DC. Like, it's not this big franchise. But honestly, either was Guardians of the Galaxy. Like, nobody gave a shit about the Guardians of the Galaxy before he made it a thing. They're literally famous because he's awesome and did such a great job with them. And if you believe some of the rumors, it's not even going to be a sequel. It's just going to be, they're just going to start it over, which I think would be like the most DC thing to do at this point. But it would also, honestly, if you have a guy like James Gunn, why not, instead of having to be held to the shit show that was the first Suicide Squad movie and try to fix it just to save face, why don't you just let him do his thing and let him build it like he built Guardians of the Galaxy?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. If anything, he should compile a Suicide Squad of characters that nobody cares about so he can completely do whatever he wants, like you said, like he did with Guardians of the Galaxy. So I think that it's a great move on their part, and I'm excited. So last story I have proves that there may actually be a God. Iron Fist was canceled at Netflix. So no season 3. It sounds like he's going to continue to pop up in this universe of shows, but we will not be cursed with any more standalone Iron Fist seasons of television, which is going to make it really hard for me to ever get around to Iron Fist season 2.
I was going to ask that, honestly. Like, are you even going to bother with season 2? And I've seen people complain, as you do on Twitter, because that's basically 75% of Twitter is people complaining. But I really wish I hadn't got us blocked on Twitter, because I would love to at the person that blocked us with the news that it got canceled.
I forgot about that.
That's just because I'm petty as fuck. But I don't know. Like, I'm surprisingly torn about this, because the last episode, well, really, honestly, the last 15 minutes of the last episode aside, season 2 wasn't an improvement. Like, I don't see what they have to do for Netflix to trust like they're going in the right direction, because they really did take quite a step forward with season 2. Now, granted, it couldn't have gotten a whole lot worse, and maybe it's more about who watched Iron Fist season 2 than anything else with Netflix. But like, if you're gonna make a season 2 after the shit show that was season 1, and they finally made an improvement, like, what could they have possibly done to make it any better? I just don't understand what Netflix necessarily wanted from them. Now I am kind of happy that it saves us from what I think could have potentially, because of the last 15 minutes of that episode, been a really, really stupid storyline in season 3. I'm glad that he's still going to be a character in this universe. We just don't feel like we have to watch it now. Like, as a nerd, like, I felt like I was obligated to watch season 2. Ultimately, I was happy I watched it because it's a lot better than season 1, but I felt obligated to watch it. And now I'm just glad that we don't have that hanging over our heads anymore.
Yeah. And from that standpoint, I think I will eventually watch it, because at some point I'm going to feel like, we've talked about it on the podcast a lot of nerds are completionists. And as these seasons keep rolling on with The Punisher, Daredevil, Jessica Jones, and Luke Cage, I'm going to feel obligated to go back and knock this season out. So I'll have to do that at some point. But you're right. I'm glad that I will never be held to watch another episode of a season 3. So,
for sure. So our main topic this episode, our main topic changes from episode to episode. We usually review a lot of movies or TV shows, and we are going to review a movie this week, as we kind of teased earlier. We are going to review Bad Times at the El Royale, which was written and directed by Drew Goddard. Is that how you pronounce that? I don't think I've ever heard it pronounced before.
Goddard, yeah.
Yes. He did The Cabin in the Woods, and he was also the creator of Daredevil. Speaking of Iron Fist in the Marvel Netflix universe, he actually created Daredevil, which I'm happy to report I was able to rewatch season 1 and 2 before season 3 gets premiered on, I believe it's Friday, so I'm really excited about that. Basically, the El Royale is about 7 strangers who must reluctantly stay at the El Royale, a rundown hotel with a secret of its own. Throughout the night, they must confront their own demons and each other. So honestly, I didn't really know anything about this movie. I literally didn't know that this movie even existed until about 2 months ago. I've talked about this a lot. I didn't even bother watching the Pet Sematary trailer, because honestly, I don't put too much stock into trailers. But this is a trailer that, first of all, did a fantastic job getting me super intrigued about this movie. And just as a film nerd, the way that it was shot and the way that it was cut together, it's probably one of my favorite trailers I've seen in a long time. It got me really jacked for this movie. And that's saying a lot, considering I didn't even know that this movie existed a couple of months ago. And it has a great cast. It has Jeff Bridges, has Chris Hemsworth, John Hamm, Nick Offerman, among several others. And I really, honestly, I was excited because of the trailer and it looked really good. But also, I kind of like these like 10 Little Indians, Identity, Hateful Eight type of movies where these strangers come together and they're forced to kind of interact with each other. I think that they're a really interesting concept. They do get played a little bit too hard sometimes. Like, there's a lot of movies. It's definitely a saturated genre, but when it's done right, it's really interesting.
Yeah, I was pretty excited for this movie. I thought the trailers for it looked really good. Whoever cut the trailers should be given some type of award, because the trailer makes it look like it's going to be an amazing thriller. And I mean, we'll get into it in the review, but needless to say, I was pretty pumped going into it. Like, the cast is amazing, and I love Drew Goddard. Obviously, he directed, like you said, Cabin in the Woods, and was the showrunner on the first season of Daredevil. So I was in. But yeah, we'll get into it in the review.
All right, so we break up our reviews very similar to the way that we break up the episodes as a whole. We break them down into segments. We kind of did our little intro just now, just kind of talking about our expectations going into the movie. And then the next segment that we like to do is just kind of a general overview of whatever we're reviewing. We call it broad strokes. So how'd you feel about Bad Times at the El Royale?
I think that this is a decent movie, but it is not great by any stretch of the imagination. Parts of it feel like Drew Goddard is doing his best Quentin Tarantino impression, and while some of that hits, other aspects of it definitely feel like he's trying to be too clever. There were definitely entertaining moments throughout this movie in places where I was bought into which direction the story was going to go, but I think that it stretches itself too thin over its 2.5 hour runtime, and just too much of it falls flat for it to be an amazing movie.
All right, so I know we say this occasionally, and I think we kind of have a reputation of, okay, well, we're going to argue this particular episode, and then I think we kind of end up meeting in the middle, or maybe not arguing as much. But just judging by your broad strokes, I think we're going to disagree on this movie. I loved this movie. I thought it was fantastic. I have to be honest, the runtime did take me back a little bit, like trying to figure out when, because again, it's been kind of a busy weekend for me to try to figure out when I was going to see this movie, given its 2.5 hour runtime, well, nearly 2.5 hours. Just looking at that, and I know that's not fair to kind of judge a movie by its runtime, but I honestly, going into it, my expectations maybe been dampered like a slightly, just because I was like, okay, well, it's 2.5 hours. It's probably going to drag at some point. And honestly, I didn't think it dragged at all. Like, maybe there's a minute or two if you nitpick that you could have cut out. Mostly for me, the singer, there's a singer that's in the movie. She didn't need to sing like 8 times throughout the movie. Like, I mean, we get it. She's a beautiful singer. It adds a little to the movie, but unless, like, I feel like she needs to sing that first song just to kind of establish that she's a really good singer. There's another song that adds to the plot of the movie, and then maybe one other time. But she sung like 6 or 7 times in this movie, and maybe you cut out one of those songs, and maybe it's not as long of a movie. But honestly, I don't think that there's much other than that I would cut from this movie. I expected to go into this movie, it being almost 2.5 hours, and be like, man, it was super bloated, and I would have cut this and that. Honestly, there's not a whole lot, and I'll get into the story aspect when we start talking about that in particular, but I didn't think that there was that much to cut from it. Now, this movie and this genre in general definitely, for sure, struggles with what I complain about some other times when we review movies, is a lot of movies have that what I call a small world problem. And I definitely think these particular movies in general really struggle with that. I mean, basically, there's no way that all of these people come together in this one particular night at the same hotel. There's just no way. And there's nothing that really brought these people to this hotel on this particular night. Like, there's really not a huge thread that goes throughout this movie that explains why all of them are at this same hotel at the same night. So it definitely has a small world problem, and that's my biggest complaint with this movie, is if you forgive that, I think you have a really cool movie that has great acting in it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that small world comparison, because it seems like nobody ever comes to this hotel anymore, and then on one night you have like 4 or 5 guests. So we'll get into it, but that's an interesting point.
Yeah, for sure. So story-wise, what'd you feel about El Royale?
So I definitely appreciate that this is an original story. I think that we review a lot of movies on this podcast that are based on books or comic books or are there sequels, and this is completely original, so I definitely appreciate that. But I don't think that it feels completely original because, like I said, in broad strokes, it seems like Drew Goddard is doing a Quentin Tarantino impression here. With that being said, unlike most Tarantino movies, this movie doesn't suck you in for 2.5 hours. It definitely has peaks and valleys as far as the storytelling goes, and I do think that whenever it's good, it is great, and I think there's a lot of aspects of the story that make it a good thriller. The problem is that when it's not good, it's extremely bland and loses, it lost my attention. So some of the parts that drag and are very dialogue heavy, that are very Tarantino-like, don't work and almost come across as though the movie is thinking that it's better than it actually is. It almost feels like Goddard thought he was being clever, like I said, in broad strokes, but it comes across to me as self-indulgent. A lot of the dialogue felt that way. So an example I have in a place where I know you were saying there wasn't much that you think that could be cut out, but there's a lot of the movie that's devoted to this scene where Jeff Bridges is talking to the actress that plays the singer. I forget the character's name, but he's telling her about how his memory's gone and this and that. And then there's a flashback to kind of Jeff Bridges' character's story, and it just reiterates his points that he was making to her. So to me, something there could have been cut out because I didn't really need to see all of that. And that's kind of where the self-indulgence comes in that I kind of felt. With all of that negative out of the way, though, like I said, I do think that whenever this movie is hitting on all cylinders, it's really great. I do think that there is some redemption in the parts of the story that work because there were legitimately times when I was surprised and anxious to see what was going to happen next. And I think that the climax of the movie is really great as well. It's just that 2.5 hour runtime really got to me in some places. And I think that the movie felt a little bloated here and there, more so than it sounds like you do. It's definitely not perfect, but I think in its best moments, it gets the job done.
So I think that when you have a movie like this, when there's so many characters, and I talk about this with different shows like Game of Thrones and like Boardwalk Empire, like there's so many different threads and so many different characters that the writers and showrunners or whoever are juggling. There's usually that lackluster thread. And honestly, for me at least, I couldn't find that thread in this film. I thought that everybody had an interesting and properly developed backstory. I honestly, after I saw this movie, I was like, well, I kind of have to be the asshole and at least think of like the one that wasn't good. And I couldn't find one that I didn't enjoy. I think the story is so well crafted that there really wasn't a wasted scene in it. I disagree that Jeff Bridges explaining his illness, because that matters later in the movie. Now, I will give you a little bit that the prison scene where he's talking to the doctor, maybe that double dips a little bit, but you get to see him in prison, and that does play I wouldn't say a big part of his character, but it does give you a little bit more backstory to him. I mean, you know he's in prison. You know that he's a criminal, but the fact that you actually get to see him in prison, I thought that played at least a little bit of a role in his character. Honestly, I don't feel like there's any wasted scenes in this movie, especially it's surprising that it's a 2.5 hour movie, and I don't feel like there's anything that's wasted in this movie. Like, even there's a small moment in the movie where you see Nixon on the TV talking about Vietnam, and I was like, okay, well, that's just kind of setting ambiance because we know that this movie's set in the past, and it's just kind of trying to set the scene. But honestly, after I saw the movie, I was like, well, maybe not. Maybe that scene in there plays a role later in the movie. Like, Vietnam does come back later in the movie and does play a role in this movie not a huge role by any means, but it does play a role. And so that scene right there, even though it seemed kind of self-indulgent early in the movie, it plays a role later in the movie. So honestly, I don't think that there's a wasted scene in this movie. I will say that the trailer does give away that Jeff Bridges isn't a priest, and I think that could have been a bigger moment in the movie. It would have been a completely shocking moment, honestly, in this movie if they hadn't given that away in the trailer. That's not necessarily the movie's fault. It's whoever made the trailer. It's still a really cool movie, or still a really cool moment in the movie. It's still slightly shocking what happens, but it would have been even bigger moment in the movie if they hadn't given away that he wasn't a priest in the trailer. The way that they shot it was still really cool, because you kind of see it as Jeff Bridges' character sees it, and I think that's phenomenal filmmaking, because it did kind of take me back a little bit, but again, would have hit a lot harder if we hadn't seen it in the trailer. Well, we didn't see that moment in the trailer, but if we knew that he wasn't a priest going into the movie because of the trailer, I think it would have been good. Also, I think this movie kind of takes a page out of the Game of Thrones playbook, as far as they kill a lot of characters, and there's a moment early in this movie where they kill a character that's played by a pretty well-known actor, and it almost kind of sets the stage for the rest of the movie. Like, you never really know what's going to happen in this movie, because we as movie buffs and TV buffs, when we watch shows and TV, and we're just kind of already conditioned, okay, this character's played by a big actor. They wouldn't have gotten a big actor to do this part if they were going to die immediately. Not that this character dies immediately in this movie, but he dies pretty early on. And I was like, oh shit, nobody's safe in this movie. And so it just kind of felt like I was on the edge of my seat pretty much the entire movie. And there are quite a few shocking moments in this movie. So I thought that really played to this film's strength.
Awesome.
No rebuttal?
No?
I thought we were going to argue a little bit more. I kind of wanted us to argue a little bit more.
No, dude, you're wrong. This movie is a train wreck.
Yeah, here we go. Shots fired.
No, man.
Bang.
I think that, we still have 2 segments to go, but I think that we're probably closer than you think. Like I said in Brush Strokes, I think this movie is good. It's just not great. I think it's
disagree.
A little bloated.
You're wrong. Shots fired. Bang. I just wanted to say bang again. That was stupid, but I wanted to do it again.
All right. Glad we could get that out of the way.
All right. So performance-wise,
I don't really have much to complain about here. Like, I think that the performances in this movie are really great. I think that you come to expect great performances from somebody like Jeff Bridges, but I think that Jon Hamm is amazing in this movie. I think that Chris Hemsworth plays a really creepy villain in this movie, even though his Australian accent sometimes kind of sneaks in a little bit, and you can tell he's trying really hard to do an American accent. I really, really, really wanted to come into this review and talk a lot of shit about Dakota Johnson, since she's in those 50 Shades of Grey movies, but honestly, she's not too bad. I think that there's a few places where she's kind of a caricature of a person, but she's not bad. I don't really know Cynthia Erivo, who plays the singer in this movie, whose name is Darlene, by the way, but I think she does a really good job, and of course she has an amazing voice. So yeah, there's not really much for me to sit here and complain about. Like, I think that everybody pretty much shows up from a performance standpoint.
Yeah, that was kind of hard for me to come up with a ton of stuff or a ton of notes about the performances, because I kind of feel the same way. And I think we've discussed this before on a past episode. It's kind of hard. It's harder for us to really articulate good acting, because it's just good. It's just, like, they were the character. They did a really good job. It's a lot easier for us as critics to be like, man, that guy was really bad. And there's nobody in this movie. Not a single person that was bad in this movie.
No, I agree.
All right. So, action, I guess we could end with. There's not a ton of action. I will say that just to kind of get my part out of the way, it was really cool. There were, again, some really shocking moments that really took me back. There is a scene towards the end that is probably the most action-y scene of the entire movie. It doesn't last very long, but it really blew me away. It was so fucking cool.
Yeah, I was really curious what you were going to come up with for this last segment. So you're right. There's not a lot of action. I think that whenever it's done really well because the suspense in this movie is really great. So there's the scene where a main character played by a big actor does bite it pretty early, like you were mentioning in the story in the story section. And that scene is somewhat action heavy, and I feel like it was done really well. And then the climax has some action in it as well, like you were referencing, and I think that that's done really well. But I think that what this movie does even better than action is the suspense. And like I said, whenever it's good, it's great from a thriller perspective. So definitely some cool ambiance in this movie as well.
Yeah, for sure. So unless you had anything else, I know this is kind of a quick review, but let's go ahead and give it a star rating out of 5 stars. How'd you feel about Bad Times at El Royale?
I am giving it a 3.5.
All right, so I am going to give it a 4, so slightly higher, but yeah, I definitely enjoyed this movie a little bit more than you, dude. It's currently in my top 10, but wow. I don't know if it's going to stay there. Like, it's already on the fringe, and we haven't even gotten to Oscar season yet, so I would be surprised if it stayed there, but it's definitely something that I will own on Blu-ray.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I'll own it on Blu-ray or not, but I am surprised it's in your top 10. I will say that. So I'm definitely curious to see if A Star Is Born knocks it out of your top 10. But I also
there's no way, man.
I know you're petty, and I know that even if you love A Star Is Born, you will play it cool and you'll be like, oh, it's okay. So
I'm not. I did just declare that I was petty as fuck earlier. So I really can't go back and say I'm not that petty. Literally, I'm pretty sure that the episode title for this episode will be Petty as Fuck.
That works.
Yeah. So, yeah, I can't really make an argument that I'm not because I just declared it on the episode. But, yeah, I don't think that I'm that bad. Like, I think you shit on me a little bit about that kind of stuff, and I don't think that I do that bad. I probably do it, but
yeah, just text me after you see A Star Is Born and let me know what you thought.
I probably won't even see it now. You've backed me into a corner.
Fight or flight.
Yeah, for sure. I'm definitely a flight because I'm a little punk bitch. But anyways, I think that's... Oh, no, I have to do Nerd Favorite. I mean, we've only done this for like 211 episodes, and I haven't almost forgotten Nerd Favorite in a while, so it was just a matter of time. But it's my episode this week to pick a topic, and honestly, I've been trying to get one of my coworkers into board games recently, and we do talk about board games every once in a while. Tyler is a big board game nerd, more than I am, but you definitely really got me into it, and we used to do board game night at your place. Now that you live in Cleveland, we don't really do that, but yeah, I've definitely been trying to get this guy into board games, mostly because I want to have another board game night. And I also saw on IGN's Daily Deals that a Gloomhaven, which is a board game that you've talked about before, is on sale. I don't know how much it's on sale for. It's normally like $150, so I'm sure it's like $120, which is still ridiculous for a board game. But it just kind of got me thinking, what is your go-to board game? Like, I'm trying to get this guy into board games. Like, what would be your go-to game? Like, if you were trying to get somebody into board games and trying to get them interested in like having a board game night, what would your go-to board game be? For me, I think me kind of posing this question to you, I think of like a game that I think somebody could pick up really easily. Like, I don't think that you play like Settlers of Canton or something like that that's super complicated, that's going to take a really long time to somebody to get into and to learn, because I think they get bored really easily. And even if the game is fun, it kind of takes a little bit for them to get used to. And so the game that I think is easy to pick up that's really, really fun is a game that you got me into, like most board games, because again, you're a bigger board game nerd than I am, is One Night Ultimate Werewolf. I fucking love that game. It's so fun and it's so easy to pick up, but also it has that nuance to it that if you've played it a few times, you're going to be better at the game, because you're going to be better at understanding what each person's role is. And if you understand the roles, then it's easier for you to dictate whether or not somebody's lying, because that can't possibly be true what you just said, because I know that your ability wouldn't allow you to do that, or this person's ability wouldn't allow them to do that. So I know that you're making this up. And so it's easy to pick up, but it's kind of hard to master in a way. And so I just think that it leads to a really fun night of playing this game.
Yeah, I mean, I love that game, and I don't get to play it enough because it doesn't seem like everybody enjoys games where it pays to be a sociopath and be really good at lying. So I mean, I love playing that game, and I play it whenever I can, but unfortunately my wife hates it. So usually when we have game nights, it's hard to convince everybody to play it because she's in the corner talking shit about it. But yeah, I love that game, and you inadvertently shit on the game that I'm going to pick.
Oh, yeah?
And that's Settlers of Catan. So I don't think Settlers of Catan is honestly that complicated, and I think that there's just enough to it and enough strategy that's needed, while it's also easy enough to pick up, that it's like a good introductory game if you want to start playing things that are a little bit more complex. I also think Pandemic would be a good choice. And again, that game isn't necessarily complicated, but there's a lot of nuance to it. But I think that playing a game as opposed to maybe Settlers of Catan, where everybody's working towards a common goal, is a way to kind of build that friendship and that relationship a little bit too, because you're not at each other's throats in the first game you're playing. You're playing a cooperative game where you're trying to beat it together. So those were kind of my two introductory board games in college that kind of set me on a path of seeking out weirder, cool games that I like doing now. So I would definitely say either of those two.
Yeah, the Pandemic co-op angle, I didn't think of that. There's another game, Betrayal at the House of the Hill, that's kind of co-op at the beginning, but then once you get to the hunt, one person essentially turns on the other people, and so that can be kind of interesting. It's a different dynamic, but that one is a little bit more complicated, and I think for somebody to like just get into it, there's a lot to explain. Like, I know the first time that we played it, it wasn't as fun as I expected it to be, because there was a lot of questions. You and your wife had never played it before, so you're obviously not knowing how to play the game. You're asking us a lot of questions, and it kind of was a damper on the game a little bit. But that game's really fun once you get into it. But yeah, the co-op angle I did not think about.
Yeah, I really like Betrayal at House on the Hill. I've almost bought it a couple times over the last couple months. Since you're the person who owns that game and you're not up here, I do want to play that again and give that another go, because it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, for sure. So that is it for episode 211 of the Nerds You're Looking For podcast. As always, we'd appreciate if you subscribe, rate, review us on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, basically any good podcatcher you use. We're on it. Especially rate us on iTunes. That way we can make our way closer to being verified critics on Rotten Tomatoes. That would be pretty cool. I mean, that would be so silly, but also very, very cool. So we know we have enough downloads to do it. So if everybody listening to this episode right now rated us, we'd be there in a second. So we definitely appreciate that. You can, like I said in the intro to this episode, you can check out all of our content on our website, thenerdspodcast.com. You can also comment, subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Nerds You're Looking For, on YouTube, obviously. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram. They're both at The Nerds Podcast. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Google+. You can also email us at thenerdsyou'relooking4@gmail.com. And finally, vote for us for Podcast of the Month at podcastland.com. For Patrick Kuhn,
Tyler Hunt,
we are The Nerds You're Looking For. Take it easy, nerds.
Later, guys.